Hello there, good morning, and welcome to our next version of the Cybiant webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about a very interesting topic. We're going to talk about an introduction to robotic process automation, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. In this next upcoming webinar, we will showcase you some of the key techniques behind RPA, how you can get started with RPA by yourself, and I'll also show you some practical tips on the next steps that you can take by yourself. But before we get started, let me start with some housekeeping about this webinar. First of all, note that this webinar is being recorded. So if you miss any part of this webinar or you would like to review it afterwards, you can always watch it back. We will share a link with the recording to all of the registered participants on this webinar. Secondly, because we have a great amount of people on this call today, I would highly encourage you to ask all kinds of questions through the chat window in the Zoom platform. This way, we can moderate all of the questions that you might have towards the end of this session. It also gives me a good way to keep track of all of the different questions that are coming in. By default, everybody in the call has been muted, so it's not going to be possible to interrupt during the webinar presentation. Towards the end of the webinar, I will take a moment to do an interactive Q&A. So if you have any questions during any part of the webinar, please feel free to put in the questions into the chat box. Last but not least, we always try to plan our upcoming webinar series. So we would greatly encourage you to put forward your feedback about this session and whether there are any follow-up sessions that you would like us to present upon. Okay, that's it for housekeeping. Let's get started with our main topic. Let me just take a moment to briefly introduce myself. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg, and I'm the Managing Director and co-founder of Cybiant, and we're based and presenting today from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Besides managing the company Cybiant, I'm also a frequent moderator at universities, and I write a lot of books. So one of the books that I've written is on the service automation framework. And in today's webinar, I will be using some of the materials from the Service Automation Framework book and how you can apply them towards robotic process automation. On the left-hand side of this slide, you can see my contact details. So if you have any questions after the webinar or you would like to get in touch with me, you can either reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn, or you can see my email address right here at the slide. Good, a little bit of introduction about myself. Let's see what we're going to talk about in this session today. Today, we are going to look at an introduction towards the world of robotic process automation. And RPA is really one of the key and fundamental developments that has disrupted the IT industry in recent years. So what I will try to do in this webinar and the agenda that I've composed is on a number of different elements. First of all, I'm going to explain why RPA is so relevant today, and more importantly, why so many organizations have automation high on their agenda. So what is causing all of that? Then I always think that it's very important to have a sound understanding of what RPA means from a technology point of view. So I will also be giving you some insights into some of the fundamental technologies that are driving RPA and RPA adoption today. Here we will talk about technologies, processes, and how especially automation works on a day-to-day basis. The second part of the webinar will go into diving into making it a bit more practical. So we'll start with explaining how to set up an RPA strategy. There are many different RPA tools available today. So what we will do in this session is that we will look at how do we define a good strategy to do that. In order to do so, we are going to be working with the RPA Maturity Model, which is something that we will introduce towards the end of this webinar. The RPA Maturity Model is a measure for RPA success and a measure for RPA adoption. So I will showcase you some key characteristics of the maturity model and how you can get started with that yourself. Towards the end, I will also present a little bit about the RPA Discovery Workshop, which is something that you can do after you've seen the webinar today. Good, let's get started with our agenda. Good, why is RPA one of those fundamental technologies, and why are so many organizations looking into it today? Well, if you're working in the IT industry, which I know most people on the call today are, you are faced with pressures from a number of different sources. And this is the same regardless of the industry that you're working in or regardless of the size of your company. Every IT organization will be confronted with a number of upcoming pressures from a number of different sources. And then I haven't even started with the more recent developments and the global pandemic and the additional pressure that that is putting on digitization and automation efforts. Things like new technologies, changing customer expectations, but also the pressure to consistently deliver better services against better optimized costing levels is increasingly becoming important. Every organization, whether they would want to or not, is faced with digital transformation questions today. This has been enhanced recently because of the global pandemic, and it has put even more pressure on IT departments to deliver digital services with higher quality at a faster rate and in a way that can be exceeding customer satisfaction and expectations in the long run. So this is not something new. I just think that the space in which this has been happening has been accelerated in the last recent years. All of these pressures are mounting upon the enterprise IT department, and they will provide a way for organizations to deal with this, and they need to find a way to do this. And this is one of the key reasons why automation is coming into the picture, because automation provides tools and technologies to deal with a lot of these pressures. Because if we take it one more step deeply, we see that although those pressures have been mounting in recent years, enterprise IT priorities are largely unaltered over the years. From an IT perspective, we still want to deliver quality services that customers like and that can empower businesses to grow. So IT has really become this strategic asset which will help companies to increase revenues and lower costs. And that is unchanged in recent years. We also need to use IT technologies to improve customer satisfaction and make sure that customers keep engaging with companies over the years. There are various ways to do that. And what we will deal with today is how automation can drive that customer engagement. How can you make sure that on an ongoing basis, customers are conversing back and forth, and how can you deal with them in the long run? More importantly, IT is also frequently used internally to increase employee engagement and make sure that people have different and better ways to work. And now that most people of us are working from home, this has also become an increasing priority. Many organizations have been forced to get ready for these kinds of ways of working in the last couple of months. And a lot of this is driven by automation technologies, as we will see in the next couple of slides. The last and sometimes overlooked aspect of IT priorities is to reduce risks, and more importantly, compliancy risks. There are a lot of different ways to deal with this on a day-to-day basis, but one of the key aspects here has to do with cybersecurity risks. In the webinar that we did 2 weeks ago, we dove a little bit deeper into how do you set up a cybersecurity framework. So if you missed that particular webinar, I highly encourage you to rewatch the recording from the session that we did two weeks ago. The key point here is that although those pressures have been rising very rapidly, a lot of the enterprise IT priorities are largely unaltered over the years. We still want to deliver quality IT services at affordable rates that will impress our customers and make sure that they keep engaging with IT in a positive way. So the question, of course, is how do we do that? And you might have guessed this. automation is really one of the drivers or the technology drivers that is enabling large enterprise IT organizations to facilitate this next way of working. I always really like this quote that you see here on the next slide, which is coming from the McKinsey Global Institute. They basically said that over the horizon is a new wave of opportunity related to robotics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Companies that deploy automation technologies can realize substantial performance gains and take the lead in their industries, even after their efforts contribute to economy level increases in productivity. So that's quite a large sentence. So if we dive down a little bit deeper into that, we can see that it's driven by a number of technological advancements, most notably robotics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And I already mentioned at the introduction that I think that it's always very important to have a bit of a understanding of the fundamental technologies which are driving these new technological trends. So a little bit later in this webinar session, we'll go to dissect that into a little bit more detail. We'll look at how robotics, machine learning, and AI is actually powering RPA and how automation subsequently can empower these new ways of working. But before we dive into that, one of the key aspects that I want you to realize is that automation provides businesses with a competitive advantage. And it's not just to increase productivity or to deliver services at a more cost-efficient rate. Automation is really driving a competition between different businesses. And I will guarantee that in the next couple of years, you will see that companies that have applied automation technologies tend to perform better than companies who don't. And the reason for that is very simple. Automation is focused on executing repetitive tasks in a more efficient, more compliant, and easier to understand manner. It forces companies to really think about the processes that they have and how they can benefit the organization. And by actively looking at that, whether you are going to automate the entire process, yes or no, it means that you are forced to review the processes and the value that you're delivering to customers. And that's one of the key reasons why I think that a lot of companies that are looking in automation are becoming more and more successful, because they're forced to look internally at the quality and the value of the services that they provide. So, is automation already in place? Well, the quick answer to that question is yes. 93% of organizations say that automation kickstarts digital transformation. And this is also kind of the link that I want to make between major initiatives like digital transformation and automation and RPA in general. RPA and automation technologies, I think, are one of the most practical ways to shape any digital transformation initiative. I've been in a lot of organizations that have started initiatives on digital transformation, but many of them need to answer still the question, how do we exactly do this? Well, RPA and service automation provide, I think, one of the most practical and tangible aspects in order to do this on a day-to-day basis. So this is where we can make sure that an organization moves from point A to point B, and you can do a measurable project which will deliver real tangible results, and that will help to digitally transform your business. So that is really why it's so important to have a look into that. And you might be on this call and already have some experience with automation technologies, or you might be completely new to this whole topic. One of the key things that I want you to take away from this session is that automation is going to impact your business. And you will need to become familiar with some of those fundamental technologies, because otherwise competitors who do will get an advantage in the long run. And that is most beautifully explained by the next slide, in which we see some of the companies that have become very successful and other companies who were late in the adoption and that are really struggling right now. And of course, these are some of the major examples and the famous world success stories of companies who have adopted newer technologies in order to be first to market and completely took over a market. I think we're all familiar with companies like Amazon, Uber, or Grab here in Southeast Asia, and streaming services like Netflix. What all of these companies did is that they embraced technology as one of the first disruptors, and that they have been using automation technologies in order to deliver their services subsequently. And I highly challenge you to think about the ways that you can use in order to become an automation adopter. How can you make sure that in your own organization, you will be leading the way with automation, leading the way with process optimization, and leading the way with different and better customer service? Automation is crucial to that effort. And that's why it's really important to start understanding how automation can help. And that all starts with knowledge. And today you've taken one of the first steps by logging into this session and being part of learning about what automation is and how it can benefit your organization. And that's really what it's all about. So in this next section, what I'm going to try to do is explain a little bit further on, well, what is then the relationship between automation in general and especially robotic process automation. Because a lot of people still think that robotic process automation has to do with robots, which is actually not the case. RPA, or robotic process automation, is more of a synonym. But what we're talking about when we're dealing with RPA technologies is that we're actually talking about software. We're talking about software that mimics the activity of a human being in carrying out tasks within a process. So although RPA technologies are frequently illustrated with the robots, as you can see here right on the screen, that is just an analogy. Because from a very fundamental point of view, a robotic process automation means software. So we're installing software, we're programming software, we're teaching software how to execute workflows, but there's no mechanical robots involved. So when we're talking about a robot in terms of RPA, we typically talk about software licenses because we typically assign a workload towards a digital software robot, and that is the equivalence of a license. And I think that this is a very common misunderstanding and misconception that we need to clear up right away in order to start understanding what RPA does. In the next and the rest of this presentation, you will hear me a lot about RPA and robots. But always keep in mind that when I'm talking about robots, I'm actually talking about software licenses. So the next question then, of course, becomes, well, why is this relevant? What can a robot or what can a software license do that is new? Why hasn't this been around for the last 10, 15 years? Because we have had computers for a long time. We have had the ability to do business process automation. We've had the ability to start designing workflows. So what is really new in RPA is that we have specialized our processes and robots in such a way that they can now excel at doing repetitive work. They can do it more quickly, more accurately, and these software robots can work 24/7. And the purpose of that is to free up people in their jobs from doing the repetitive work over and over again. So that's also one of the key points here. RPA is not meant to replace the work that people are executing. RPA is there to facilitate people to do their work more quickly, more accurately, and with more perfection. Because if you train a particular robot in your job to do work that you've been doing every single day, then it's something that you're already good at. So you can easily teach a robot to copy that process. And a little bit later in this webinar, we will show you how to do that exactly. So one of the key questions that I get asked a lot is, well, we understand the foundation of RPA, we understand that it can help with process optimization, and we understand that it can make processes more effectively. But what can a software robot actually do? Give me some examples and use cases. So that's why we've composed the next slide, which is some of the most common tasks which can be easily handed over to robots, and that does not necessarily require human intervention. So RPA bots and RPA software licenses are very good at executing these tasks. We can learn and program robots, for instance, to log into any application. Whether it's a desktop application or a cloud application, doesn't really matter. We can program them to follow particular instructions and to click on certain buttons, even if it's in a web browser. That's one of the really fundamental aspects of RPA technologies. We can also teach robots to move files and folders around. So in case, for instance, you would need to make an expense report at the end of every single month, or you would not need to move files and extract information from one file and put it into another. This is something that can be very easily done by RPA robots. Another key feature of RPA software is that it's able to extract content from documents, even from PDFs, emails, and other kinds of forms of data that we collect. So from a very fundamental point of view, RPA solutions are incredibly useful to extract information from any system, document, or in any database, transform that information into something that you would like to have as a result, and then put that in a new location. And that new location could be a document, it could be an Excel sheet, it could be in another database, or it might even automatically send a message to a mobile phone or print it out as a document. It can even automatically send emails for you. So the whole process of getting information out of one system, transforming it into something that you need, and storing it at a different location, that is what RPA robots excel at. And that is something that I would like you to think about for a moment. Because if we think about what is done at most offices, and especially in people that are consuming IT services on a daily basis, it is exactly that. If you're working in finance or in HR or in IT operations, one of the primary things that you will do all day is search for information at a variety of different sources, interpret and deal with that information on a daily basis. So whether you're making contracts or whether you're making Excel sheets, and then you'll store that into new files or databases somewhere in your organization. Or for example, you send a report to your boss. So the extraction of information, the transformation of information, and then storing it at a different location is what a lot of people in their daily jobs do every single day. And I think that if I look at myself, and I'm pretty sure that that's the same for a lot of people here on the webinar today, this is, you spend at least a decent amount of hours every single week with doing this, whether it's making reports for your boss, making calculations in Excel. A large quantity of work that we do has to do with interpreting, transforming, and storing information. And this is exactly where RPA robots can help. So this is tasks that can be easily handed over to robots. So where does this happen the most? Where can you make some of the quick wins in terms of RPA? Well, obviously, this is at locations in the organization that need to deal with the transformation of information on a daily basis. So here you can think about internal operations and company functions like HR, IT services, procurement, or finance. All of these different company functions are characterized by the fact that they need to deal with large amounts of information and that they need to do that in a very consistent way. So this is one of the prime target audiences in which RPA can help to make organizations more efficient. We can also look at aspects like technology enhancements. So if we need to connect two different systems and move data from one system to another, And that can be in the form of system integration or data verification and validation, or even in order to enhance and make system functionality better. As we mentioned before, RPA is really good at extracting information, transforming it, and putting it at a different location. And this is exactly how we can use RPA technologies in order to enhance that towards the future. A third major aspect and domain for RPA in which you can get quick results is in the accountability and audit section, because RPA aspects are very good in order to make sure that you're compliant to certain SOPs. A robot is characterized by the fact that it's very consistent and it's always trackable and traceable. So every action that a robot does can be monitored and can be logged. And this is something that, especially in the accounting and audit world, is very crucial, and it's something that we would like to have. Whereas if the same tasks were done by a human being, it would be way harder to exactly monitor and audit that, because it happens in the brain instead of a computer. So accountability and audit is a third major domain of RPA. And then the last part, and I think one of the most interesting applications of RPA, is that, of course, in data analytics and reporting, in which we can train robots to detect patterns, in which we can ask them to automatically execute algorithms and to produce reports and gather and construct information from a variety of different sources. Robots can do that within seconds, whereas we as human beings will need to have more time in order to run through all of these different systems. So these are really some of the key business drivers for RPA technologies and how you can use them in your own organization. So why is that relevant? And why has RPA become to such prominence, especially in the last 5 to 7 years? Well, in order to understand that, I always like to explain this slide, because RPA is based on 3 very fundamental technologies. It's based on artificial intelligence, screen scraping, and business process automation. And I would even go so far as to say that RPA is an advancement or a more advanced form of business process automation. So let's start with that. Business process automation uses technology to execute recurring tasks or processes. And this has been in existence for more than a decade, maybe even 2. BPA is something that a lot of organizations have already started with, or that they have in place already. So in order to understand how RPA is different, you will need to consider the 2 additional technologies, which are now embedded in most modern RPA platforms. And let's start with one that you might never have heard of before, but which is a very fundamental technological advancement that powers RPA solutions. And that is the technology of screen scraping. Screen scraping is the process of collecting screen display data from applications and translating it towards other applications. So it can capture data from one application and transfer it to another. In simpler words, screen scraping is everything that you do on a computer. So basically, if you log into your machine in the morning, you click on certain applications, you launch your Outlook, you go through a number of emails, then you open up a browser, you click on certain elements, and that is what you do as part of your work. Screen scraping technology allows people to follow exactly what you do on a screen. So for instance, if you need to go to Google and type in the exchange rate, we can follow exactly what you're doing within your browser, which kind of commands you're typing in, and which information from the browser then you subsequently need to use in order to complete your task. And that screen scraping technology is exactly what we're using in RPA solutions. We can train the robots to follow what you do on a daily basis and then automate that accordingly. So in case you need to get the exchange rates from Google, we will be able to mimic that same command. We can open up the browser for you. We can type in the exchange rate into Google, and then we can immediately extract the exchange rate, which is displayed in the browser, copy paste that into an Excel sheet so that we can make the calculations that you would need to do. And this is because we are able to follow every click, screen, swipe, or any button that you click on your computer. And screen scraping technology allows for RPA solutions to do that. And this is really fundamental, and it's one of the key reasons why RPA has been progressing so rapidly in recent years, because this technology has not been around for a very long time. Speaking about new technology, what RPA and how RPA is also different is that a lot of technologies that are part of artificial intelligence are now being embedded into RPA solutions. So technologies that mimic decision-making, technologies like machine learning are now embedded into most RPA solutions. So this does not only mimic the process that people are following, we actually try to make and do it a little bit more in a smart way. So the workflow design, the elements that we can do there is all really based on technologies that are coming out of the artificial intelligence domain. So if there's one key slide that I want you to take away from this webinar, it's this one. These are the key elements that are powering any kind of RPA solution. And I always think it's very fundamental to understand which technologies we're talking about before you can apply them in your own organization. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about next, because now that you have a bit of an understanding why RPA is important and what are some of the underlying technologies that are powering RPA on a day-to-day basis, in the next couple of slides, I would like to take you through the steps on where do you get started? How can you make RPA work in your own organization? So we'll start at the very beginning. In any organization, we will always start with an organizational strategy. So we start all the way at the top. And from that, we will get an IT strategy and we will get a variety of IT projects. So the organizational strategy is always where we need to begin, because this outlines the overall organizational objectives, growth plans, and corporate goals. So let's start with that. Out of that organizational strategy, a lot of different aspects of the organization will follow. And especially if you're working in a large enterprise organization, you will see that this is a yearly planning cycle. Hopefully you're already done with the planning for 2021 and your organizational strategy has been translated into an IT strategy, HR strategy, financial strategy, etc. We can translate and cascade all of that down towards the organizational strategy. So the next question then, of course, is, well, where does a RPA fit in? And RPA fits in at the second level. So RPA is never going to design the organizational strategy, because that is something that humans excel at. We are very good in creative thinking and doing these kinds of things. But RPA can help with the implementation of the different projects within particular verticals. So our RPA is extremely well suited to help with IT projects, HR projects, or even financial projects. So you need to start with thinking about which particular domains do we like to start and which particular domains do we think RPA can help. So there are a number of different aspects where automation projects can help to realize business strategy. And I've listed a couple of very common use cases of which there are known solutions available and which have been providing successful results over the recent years. So my recommendation is always to start with one of these case studies, which have a track record in other organizations. And especially if you're new to the domain of RPA, these are processes that have a high success rate. They can be done way more efficiently, and RPA can really help to do that. So I'm not going to cover all of them, but you can think about very simple processes like processes to pay, or within instance in the HR domain, like onboarding or offboarding our employees. This is something that happens in every organization, and the process is more or less the same every time. So RPA solutions can really help you to automate this process all the way from the beginning to end. So as soon as you have set up a business strategy, start picking projects that can support that business strategy within some of these use cases and domains that have a proven track record. And that's really one of the first ways to get started. The way that you can do that is by designing workflows. So here on the next slide, you see a bit of an interactive video of how you can actually do that. So this is a UiPath environment, which can mimic, in this case, to get and read your email messages and then store and archive them. So today we don't have the time to go into actual live demonstrations, but if you would like to be interested in that, we can always set up a demo account for you in case you're interested in that. But this is what an RPA solution would look like in real life. Good. So as soon as you've decided your strategy and you are able to see what you would like to do and you have an idea about which particular elements you would like to do, the second key step is to start looking into the RPA Maturity Model, which is the main model that I've outlined here on the next slide. RPA and the adoption of RPA typically happens in 4 main stages. And you see some of the key requirements and the key aspects between the different levels on this slide. Every organization that I've worked with in the past always starts at level 1 because they will always need to have a startup phase in which they're becoming familiar with RPA. But this model really helps organizations understand the bigger picture. It makes a roadmap for 2 to 3 years in which you will move from this more startup program towards a fully high-performing RPA organization. And in the projects that I've worked on, we typically see that this is a journey of a year to 18 months in which you will move through the different levels. In each of the different levels, you need to start thinking about different enterprise requirements. So very a simple example, you will see that in an emerging RPA program, you will need to start looking into security privacy policies, for instance, in level 2, which is not necessarily something that you focus on in the beginning when you start up with your RPA program. So moving through the different levels keeps shifting focus and will make your program move between all of the 4 different levels. So this is typically step number 2 in the adoption of RPA practices. So in step 1, we'll start with the business practice. Step 2, we'll start defining the roadmap of what steps do you need to take in order to get there. So I have a lot more information available about the RPA maturity model. So in case you're interested in that, drop me a note after the webinar and I'll be happy to share this in further detail with you. What we do when we're assessing these kinds of capabilities is that we will look at 10 major capability areas in order to assess all of the different aspects that I just showcased in the RPA maturity model. And very briefly speaking, we can separate that between RPA program management, which is focused more on the organizational aspect, the design aspect, and the process aspect. And the second 4 capabilities focus on the technology. So here you see that there's a very clear overview in ways in which you can start adopting and adapting RPA best practices by focusing on a number of different capability areas. For each of these capability areas, there's maturity levels for all of the 4 domains. So if you make a matrix of this, you would get 40 different areas that you would need to look at as you move through your RPA journey. So this is a very useful way in which you can really start translating the strategy that we talked about in step 1 into an actionable plan of adoption that you can work with in the next few stages. And this is what we refer to as capability areas. As soon as you have those capabilities in place, it's very important that you start monitoring those capabilities. So assessing your current capabilities is part of having a sound RPA strategy. You would like to know where you are today in order to identify the gaps where you need to do improvements to move towards a higher level of maturity towards the future. And it's not for the sake of getting a higher maturity overall, it's for the sake of making sure that your processes are more compliant, following data privacy laws and regulations, and that you deal with data in a way that is relevant for any enterprise organization. So this is, as soon as we assess those capabilities, you will know where the gaps are, and this is something that you would need to manage. So on the bottom of this slide, you will see some capabilities that are in green, which are fully managed, or ones that are in orange or red that require some additional attention. So that's the way that you can move through these different aspects. Then in step number 3, we will start building capabilities through a number of use cases. And we've already identified a number of those use cases before, especially on the slide where I showcased you some common examples, for instance, in IT or HR, of processes that you could do. So the way that you will start your RPA implementation journey is basically by following the same cycle that you see on this slide over and over again. You identify a use case, you start looking into the automation of that by building a first robot. You then identify the processes which are required in order to support that robot. You'll build capability, so you run it for a while. You embed the lessons of that automation first, and then you start moving on towards the next use case. So organizations that I've been in, they start with a very simple project. They start with, they typically refer to it as a base case or a proof of concept. And based upon that, they will start automating more and more processes. And the beautiful aspect of that is that as soon as an automation is in place and it's working well and it's producing results, then basically that automated process can run automatically. So it frees up a lot of time, no matter which department you're in, whether you're working in IT or in finance or in HR. It frees up resources to start thinking about which processes can we automate next. And this is something that I've seen that works really, really well in practice. Good. Based upon that, you will also need to measure and monitor the results. So it's not just automating a process just once. You will need to keep monitoring whether the processes that you have automated, whether they're up and running, whether there are any problems. So it's not just a one-time implementation and then you're done. You really want to make sure that all of the different automated processes that you have implemented are being measured and monitored on a day-to-day basis, so that you have always a real-time overview of how much time did we save through automation, how much more efficient our process is now. And this also kind of shows back towards the business what the whole business case of RPA actually is. And that can all be shown in nice dashboards as the one that you see here right on the screen. Good. So what I've done so far is kind of walk you through the ways in which you can start all the way from a business strategy, moving towards a more high-level plan in terms of a roadmap with the maturity model, and then towards the more practical aspects of individually automating different processes within the organization. And this is really a cascade moving all the way from the more strategic aspects of the organization towards the more practical and implementation aspects. So I hope that that was a good explanation of how do you move from those different aspects in order to make it actually work. From having done this a number of times and for a number of years right now, there's a couple of key best practices with regards to RPA that I just would like to share with you. And the first one is maybe just the most important. You really want to make sure that in order to make RPA work, just get started. As soon as you have some initial planning in place, start exploring what RPA can do. Start building your own robots. Start optimizing and automating a process. And as soon as you've gotten started, you will see the initial results. You will see how much time it frees up for particular processes once you've automated them. So that's really one of the first key lessons I would like to share with you today. After that, it's really important that you keep collaborating within the RPA program and the CIO, making sure that there is a critical, the CIO is really critical in creating an environment that is successful for RPA adoption. There's always a lot of fear when it goes around automation, and people are afraid that it's going to replace jobs or the work that they do. So you need to really make sure that you keep collaborating with the IT department and make sure that people explain how RPA will be benefiting them instead of posing a threat. Third key a piece of advice is to really establish aggressive goals and deliver. Make sure that you have processes in place that can quickly convert excitement into results so that you can showcase how RPA can help organizations become more efficient, how you can ensure that cost savings are realized. Fourth one is invest in the process assessment and the improvement capabilities. And that's in line with the maturity model that I've explained a couple of slides ago. Make sure that you have this longer term roadmap, because that will showcase guidance to the organization, and it will make sure that everybody's on board with the next steps that need to be taken. It's really good to have this roadmap already upfront before you get started with your first project. And then the last piece of advice is to really balance the dual priorities of governance and productivity. Whereas the key objective, and frequently the first reason why companies start with RPA, is from a productivity point of view, we also want to make sure that we keep good control, meaning that we have a good overview of who is doing what, who is responsible for aspects within the RPA process, and especially if we're dealing with data and security and privileges, how do we deal with that from a governance point of view? So these are 5 core lessons that we've kind of learned over the years and that I would like to share with you today. Good. I am getting towards the end of my time. I hope this was useful. I hope you got a bit of a better understanding of what RPA is all about, what its fundamental technologies are, and how you can get started with this all by yourself. So obviously, the reason that we're providing you with these sessions and these kinds of information about the content of RPA is that we have a lot of experience with that. So our company Cybiant helps organizations with RPA implementations across Southeast Asia. We have a lot of best practices, lessons learned, and proven strategies for RPA program development and maturity. So in case you're interested in that, it's not going to be a whole sales pitch, but please reach out to us to ask for the RPA Discovery Workshop. We have done this now with more than a dozen enterprise IT organizations within Southeast Asia, and it's really the first way to get started. The RPA Discovery Workshop is a half-day workshop. It's free, so I would definitely recommend to do it. And basically what we will do then is we'll send out a maturity questionnaire in advance. We will come to your office to make a first use case. This is the first use case that we always start with. And then we will work out what the business case is and how much efficiency and money you can save by adopting RPA technologies. So in case you're interested in that, please reach out to either to me or to the person that's going to send you the webinar slides afterwards, because this is how all of our successful RPA implementations have always started. More information about the RPA Discovery Workshop is available on our website, which you see the link right here. And there's also a whole slide deck that we specifically have about the UiPath, the RPA Discovery Workshop, which you can use. So far, a link towards our more commercial objectives of our company. And I think that now would be a very good moment to take some questions. I've seen a number of questions coming in during the webinar, so let me take a moment to look at that while I'm going to open that up. Please feel free to add any additional questions in case you have any. Good, so we're going to start with a question from Wong An, and that is, while there are many RPA platforms available, how do we access the one that fits us the best? Well, there are a lot of RPA platforms available, and of course, that's a choice that you would need to make in terms of what is your key priorities, what is your budget, what is your growth plans with RPA. I've worked with a number of different platforms over the years. At Cybiant, we have partnered with UiPath, which is some of the screenshots and the technology that you saw, because we think that's one of the leading platforms at the moment. So that's the one that we are actively promoting and selling. But it's not to say that that is the only one or the best one. So selecting an RPA platform is based on your requirements. So if you are interested in selecting the best technology platform for your organization, I would highly recommend to start with doing this maturity assessment. Start with looking at what is the growth path that we have with RPA, what do we want to do, and which technology can support us in that maturity journey. Because the last thing you would want is to switch between RPA platforms halfway through the journey. So I hope that that will give you an answer to your question, Wong-An. Thank you so much for asking that. Our next question comes from Mohammed Shazvin. What is your recommendation, which RPA software to use, and what is the advantage compared to others? So it's kind of the same question that Wong-An asked. There's a lot of good RPA software available. We can obviously advise you different packages based on your requirements, but the most important part from my own personal experience is to just start with your internal organization. So define which processes you would like to automate, and start defining your strategy first. And that's also why we always start with this discovery workshop, because you first want to discover which processes you would like to automate, what's the business case, and how you can do that. So that's my short answer to it. I know that that's probably not the recommendation you would be looking for, but that's the way, or I would say the best way to select software, as it would be with any other software solution that you choose. Good, next question is again from Wong-An. Does Cybiant carry UiPath only? Well, we basically carry two RPA solutions. One is from Microsoft and the other one is from UiPath. Those are the two active partnerships that we have in place and with which we have a lot of experience. So yeah, we did need to choose a couple of partners. So our primary experience is with the UiPath and with Microsoft. Good, so I hope that answers those questions. I also received another question that is, what are bots and how many types of bots are there? Well, that's actually a pretty good question to ask. When we're referring to bots within RPA, what we're typically referring to is software licenses. And that's sometimes a little bit confusing, but if you look at RPA technology, frequently the billing and the invoicing is done based on the number of bots that you have. So a very easy way to always make this kind of comparison is by considering robots as people. So suppose that you have a particular department, and let's say it's a finance department, you will have, let's say, 100 people working there. That means that there's a head count because there's so many hours in the day, and with 100 people, you can do the amount of work that is required. It works exactly the same way in terms of the robots that we're considering. A robot will have a fixed number of capacity. So based on the capacity that one bot can do, you can kind of make a calculation how many robots you would need in order to carry the workload or to cover the workload that you're looking at. And that's the way that we look at bots in practice. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Good, next question that we received is, for the RPA of opening emails and attachments, then subsequently to automatically send out emails requires machine learning to ensure that new commands can be read for the automation to be done. Business can be dynamic anyway. So yes, that's a very good statement. So obviously, opening emails, looking through attachments, sending out emails, that is, I would say, fairly basic RPA technology. So of course, there will be new situations that will be encountered. So the way that it works from an automation point of view is that you can keep track of all of the work that the robot does automatically. And that's exactly why I mentioned earlier why you would need to have monitoring. Because in some cases, you will see that if it's a new situation that the robot cannot automatically figure out on its own, you will get a notification that the process was either unable to run or it was unable to execute according to the specifications. So the fact that you are executing work through RPA does not mean that your whole monitoring requirements is done. So machine learning will help with a lot of that, but of course, there's always situations that are new or unrecognized. Good. The next question is from Arif. How do I determine that I need a bot for all my processes to be automated or two? Well, that requires a bit of experience, Arif, and it's also dependent on which platform you're choosing. So they all have their different licensing structures. But for instance, suppose that you would have 3 terabytes of data that needs to be processed every month, or you know how many CPUs you would need in order to process all of the work that you would like to calculate. Based upon that, we can make a calculation of how many bots you would need in order to support your processes. So again, the same example that I used earlier, suppose that you have an amount of work that you would need to do in a finance department. You can make a calculation of the amount of work that needs to be done, and then how many hours there are in a day for people to do that. So you will get a calculation of how many people you would need to staff your department. That would be the same way that we would make a calculation for a robot. So every robot will have a maximum capacity, and based upon that capacity, we can make a calculation how many processes we would need or how many bots we would need in order to automate your process. So I hope that that answers your question. I get another question from Wong N. Great, would you be able to share the pros and cons of UiPath versus Microsoft? Do you see them as competitors or as part of an ecosystem? I would say that that's actually quite an interesting question. I would say that they're complementary because in many cases, organizations that choose for a Microsoft solution do that as an add-on because they also already have other Microsoft solutions in place that they would like to automate. So those are the companies that typically choose to add RPA on their other Microsoft processes. So that's companies that frequently choose the Microsoft solution. Companies that choose UiPath have frequently more specialized requirements. So for instance, they need to get data from external systems, which are not necessarily within the Microsoft environment. So it's kind of different orientation, I would say. Obviously, they're both of the part of the same ecosystem. So that's something that you would need to consider. So it's a little bit hard to say give the pros and cons of each one's just here in the webinar, because I would need to kind of further understand your particular use case in order to do that. Good. The last question is, oh, that's Jason saying I need to leave to get to another meeting. That's all fine. I think we're out of the time and we're getting towards the hour already. I would like to thank everybody again for participating in today's session again. You will get a short survey afterwards with requests to provide us with some of the feedback about the webinar, what you liked and which particular aspects you would like us to cover in a next webinar. Once again, we'll post these slides as well as the recording online. So in case you would like to review all of that, please look at our website to download the slides. It has been a great pleasure to present to you again. Thanks so much for logging in today with the large numbers that you have. And I look forward to seeing all of you in any of our upcoming sessions. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.